Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Christy Stratus, author of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart, Brotherhood of Secrets, both novels in the Dark Victoriana collection. They're all historical suspense. And my awesome co-host is Richard H. Stevens. He is an epic fantasy author of the series Forged Universe, Soul Forged Saga, and more. So Lurking for Legends is a live interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or simply make comments on what you hear in the show. So tonight we have Jennifer Ann Schlag, mostly known for dark fantasy, but also multi-genre. So welcome, Jennifer. How are you tonight?
How are you?
Welcome.
So glad to have you here. So I did see that you have, as I said, the main focus is dark fantasy. So we want to hear all about that, but you also have some other genres. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe your books, but especially yourself to start with.
Well, yeah, I started writing like really young, like just really short stories. And I got into screenplay writing, entered some contests. I didn't win, but yeah, I've been writing probably since I was like 8 years old, maybe 9. So yeah, it's been something that has been with me since the very beginning.
So screenplays were first and then novels. Is that right?
Yeah, my first screenplay like a serious screenplay was Govel, Parallel Destiny, which became a novel, which actually prompted me to start novel writing because I wrote the backstories to the characters and I realized there was a lot of story to tell. And it couldn't be done in a screenplay. You know, screenplays, most movies only last maybe 1, 2, maybe a trilogy. But yeah, Govel was what really started me serious writing. So that was a lot of fun doing an adaptation of a screenplay into a novel. Usually it's the other way around. You do a novel into a screenplay, but yeah, it was fun. And it was done in first person too. So the screenplay is not first person, but the novel is in first person, which was tricky, but it was fun. It definitely teaches you about your characters. I think all authors should play around with screenplay writing. I think it just like opens things up for your characters that you didn't know before.
I don't
like when you're saying screenwriting, it seems. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. We're just going to talk over each other. You go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to say, screenplay writing to me always sounds intimidating because it feels like a whole other thing that I now have to learn. But to you, it's how you started. And you're saying that, writers could actually learn from it. So like, what kind of things do you think that we would learn from it? Like for someone like me, who's like, that sounds a little bit intimidating. I'm used to novel writing and short stories and stuff like that.
Well, I think like the first thing that I learned about my character is that like Colt is the main character of Govel. And writing the screenplay version of him, I saw only like a few things that I didn't realize in the book, which I had to go back and change the book because it wasn't matching the screenplay. So there was just more depth to Colt in the screenplay and not the novel. So I learned more about him in the screenplay than I did the novel, which I think that when you have like multiple characters that you're trying to tell a story for and it's being told through a first person, you have to go back and just find some more things about the character that you wouldn't normally find in a book. I think with most authors we tend to keep a book series going on for as long as we can because it's hard Richard I know has like a 700-page book that he just put out, Keeper of the Jewel, but for me I like to split up my story. Some authors can do it. I can't write like 700 pages, but I like to break up my story, and just the screenplay I think helped me break up Colt's story a little bit better. So I think for most authors, it just helps to break it up a little bit. If you think of it as like a movie rather than a book.
That's interesting. I didn't mean to write a 700-page book. It just happened, but
no, it's good. It's good.
Since I write epic fantasy, it's good, I guess. It's certainly slowing down my production output, though. But I was just going to say, I don't know a lot about screenplays other than I heard some about screenplays when I went to the 20 books to 50K Vegas author conference in 2019. I sat in one class where they were talking about screenplays, and they're claiming that you got to stick to like 7 acts or 7 different acts. If I might be mistaken about what I'm citing here, but there's 7 different acts that you're supposed to follow in a certain order. Like, to me, especially being a fantasy author, who I'm a pantser, not a plotter. I couldn't imagine trying to adhere to the tenets of you got to do this at this point and you got to do this at this point. And I imagine all stories must be like that, where you have different mini climaxes to lead to the major climax at the end of the book. But in my mind, as I write a story, I never think of any of these processes. I just write the story. I can't even imagine how you would start writing screenplays before you could actually start writing, like before you start writing a novel. That must have been so. What would actually make you want to write a screenplay? I'm just trying to wrap my head around.
I wanted to pursue filmmaking. It was what I wanted to do.
Okay.
Like, as soon as I got out of high school, I wanted to do screenplays. I wanted to direct. So I think, and I was reading up on a lot of things. And one of the best screenplays I ever read was James Cameron's Aliens. It was just one of the best screenplays. It was just so detailed. It actually read like a book. If you ever get a chance to read it, you can find it on, I think, simplyscripts.com. It's actually written by him, and it reads like a book. It's so detailed. And I was like, wow. I was like, that's cool, because, books is what you usually find all the details in. You don't usually find scripts, because scripts are very short. They're just like, he ran. That's it. That's all you see. But in a book, we get very dramatic about how he ran, But it's very detailed. And I was like, I like that. I was like, I could write a screenplay like that. But as I was writing it, like I said, the backstories, they just took on a different route. And I was like, I don't think I can tell this in 120 pages, which is usually the rule of thumb for screenplays. You can't be more than 2 hours.
Wow.
So 120 pages, I'm like, I can't tell the whole story in 120 pages. I need to expand. And then I was like, you know what? I'll try novel writing. Why not? And I don't know, from there, it stuck with me. And like I said, I just saw my characters in a different light. I was like, I thought I knew everything about Colt in the screenplay, and then in the book, and then I'm bouncing back and forth between the two. And I'm like, there's so many things I didn't know about him that now I do. And it just makes you see your characters just in a different light, because they're in a different setting. A movie is meant to be very quick. We're there for an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe, and that's it. And then we got to wait for the next one. But with a book, you can take your time. You can put it away for a few minutes. But in a movie, we're glued to the screen, and we just want to see what happens with the action. But a book can take you, as you know, a book can be forever. A book can go on forever. But that's why with Colt, I was like, when it came time to write the novel version, I was like, what do I do with him that I didn't do in the screenplay? And how do I build on him? And that's why I like bouncing back between the two of them. But I haven't written a screenplay in a long time. I got too focused on novel writing, and that's kind of where my journey of screenwriting ends.
So I've thought about turning my books into screenplays, to maybe send them to someone and say, hey, what do you think of this? Do you find it easier to go from a screenplay to a book, or from a book to a screenplay? Like, I can't imagine taking, like you say, a 700 book and throwing it into a 120 page screenplay.
I think your book would have to definitely be probably watered down. I know with Lord of the Rings, they butchered it. Like, there's so much in those books that they don't have in the movies, so much. And your book is like that. Your book is on that level of like Lord of the Rings, that epic fantasy. Mm-hmm. So I think, for you, I think with authors, we get very disappointed if our books become a movie, because we know how the story plays out. And when a screenwriter or director, whatever, sits down, they only take certain things out of your book. And they just take like all the really high action scenes, something that's going to, keep the audience intrigued and everything. But I think for you, like your book, I think they would butcher it just because it is so long. I mean, and like I said, your stories are good. They're really good stories, but I think they would just 700 page book, that's going to be shortened into maybe 150 page screenplay. You're breaking into like the 3 hour movie thing. And so, I mean, don't ask me to tackle your book for a screenplay, because I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could.
I will not ask you.
I wouldn't know where to start because and it's another thing, like when you're writing a book, I don't know how you guys write your books, if you do like a plot, like plan out your plot, or you just write and then where it ends, it ends. That's how I did it in the beginning. When I wrote my first book that I published, Night First, The Divinity of Damien Calla, I wrote it. I knew how it ended, so I just wrote it. Whatever happened, happened. But then as I started, progressing with trying to get writing to be better for me, and I realized you have to plan it. You have to plan out your plot, because actually recently I just revised one of my books because I realized I wrote it like I wrote my first book. I just wrote it and I didn't think about how it was going to begin or end. I just wrote. So when you plan it out, you'll notice that your story flows better. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how you guys figure out your books, but I've learned that really planning it out, step one, all the way down, it really does help. Especially if you're writing multiple books at the same time, which I usually do. So that's probably a bad thing.
I love having multiple works in progress myself.
Yeah.
I'm not a planner. I would like to be. I think it would be awesome. I have tried and tried to be able to plan my books. I just think it would be smoother if I could. But anytime I try to plan them, I am always so far off base from the way the story actually has to go and will end up going. It's like a waste of time, for me, because I'll start out like, here's the plan and here's my writing, and it'll go about this far, and then it's just. That's it. It just goes a totally different direction and in a better direction for me. So it's frustrating to not be able to, and I'm glad that you've found like a way to smooth out that process for yourself. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I had to. It was just getting too crazy because I've revised my book so many times, and I know, Rusty, he's probably mad at me because I'm supposed to send him the revised edition of Heir of Dragmore, which I think is my best work. I really do. I put a lot of effort into that book, but I learned that by planning it, I think that when you don't plan and you just write, I think, especially if you're writing a series, you kind of get lost in what you wrote in the first book or the second book, and then by the time you get to the fifth book, you're like, where is this story going? Some authors get criticized for writing filler books, and you know what that is, where it's just a book that doesn't really have anything worth reading. It's just sort of there to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. But I think that when you plan, you can actually, determine how much your story is, like how much of your story is to tell. Do you have 3 books for that story, or do you have 7 books? I think that's why when I planned out some of my book series, I realized I don't need 4 books to tell this story, and I can tell it in 2 books. Like Heir of Dragmore was only supposed to be 1 book, but as I got halfway through, I realized that it definitely needs more than 1 book because of what happens at the end. I don't like leaving cliffhangers. I really don't. Sometimes we have to, because it's for whatever it may be, if you're trying to, try to tease the audience, or if you're just purposely doing it to kind of make readers angry, which sometimes we do. But yeah, I think planning, it just helps your story flow better. And it also just helps you mentally figure out what story you're telling next. Is it going to continue? Is there going to be new characters? I do that now. I write down every single character. I write down what they're doing in the first book, what they're going to do in the second book. Are they bad? Do they turn bad? And I just realized that it makes my story it looks more just like cohesive. Everything fits together and melts together better.
Yeah, one of the things that I have heard people who, particularly in fantasy, actually, because you're right, dark fantasy.
Yeah.
One of the complaints I've heard from people who write a series specifically in fantasy and they aren't able to plan, or they don't start out planning, is that by the time they get to book 3, they realize that things need to change in book 1 or 2, and it's very frustrating for them. And sometimes they don't feel they can change it, and so it changes the path that the whole series would have taken, or they go back and they then change. And of course that can be frustrating, and trying to either market that or decide whether to say that you did that or how to present it, so it does make sense if you're able to plan like for that series, as you're saying, then you'd know what's coming and whether you're going to struggle with book 1 and 2 and whether things have to change. I would love to do that. I'm kind of doing what Richard does, which is actually I'm backwards doing it because I already wrote 2 of my books, and mine are not a strict series though. They just have crossover. But Richard does an Excel sheet as he's writing, I think, right?
Yeah, I use an Excel sheet. So as soon as I'm gonna have like 30 books in the series, but they take place over a couple millennium, and but I still have to know the lore that went into the story, the backstory. So I use Excel spreadsheets. So whenever I have some lore that I think might be important, 500 years later, it just someone remembers the history. I don't have to go through 7 or 8 books trying to figure out where the heck I wrote that. It's on an Excel spreadsheet. So I do plot and plan a little bit, and as I keep going, I can put more into storylines and stuff like that, where I have a bit of a web of a structure, but I certainly am not a planner per se. I just want to, you were talking about cliffhangers, and I just want to make a point that there's really nothing wrong with cliffhangers, but I'm thinking as an author, especially an independent author, if you want to put a cliffhanger out there, you better have that other book ready.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm very far behind on all my projects.
No, for sure. If you leave someone on a cliffhanger, they're going to go, but if they look on Amazon and, oh, good, there's book 2, they're not going to feel as bad. It's like watching TV. You're watching a TV series, and they always leave you hanging at the end of the show. Well, it's okay, and it just makes you look forward to next week.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're not putting that book out for 2 or 3 years, I think then you're going to certainly upset the writers.
No, I know, and it's. I mean, I had some personal things happen between 2015 and 2018. Like both my parents passed away from cancer, so I had a lot of things happen. So when I released Night First, The Divinity of Damien Calla, the first book, I had already the second book planned. I had it. I was writing it, but then my dad passed away, and then I got sidetracked with worrying about my mom because she wasn't feeling good. And then when she passed away in 2018, I just sometimes unfortunately our lives just take a different route, and we can't really focus on the things. So I don't know. I think I mean, it's my fault. I should have actually focused on writing, because it probably would have been good therapy rather than just being depressed and, not writing. I should have been writing, but I just didn't have I feel bad because my parents never got to read any of my books. And it kind of hurt to try to write. And I'm like, who am I writing for? I don't have a fan base. I don't have, a lot of people that are buying my books. So it's like, who am I going to write for if I don't even have my parents, that are going to read my books? But yeah, so I'm really far behind. But again, like I was saying, I have multiple projects and they're all going at once. And just recently I decided I can't do that anymore. I have to focus on one book at a time. I'm just getting too far behind on all these deadlines that I made for myself. And like you said, you are working on multiple, projects at a time. And it's hard. It's really hard, especially if they're not set in the same genre, and mine are not. I have a young adult series I'm doing, and then I have a sci-fi fantasy series that I'm doing on top of the dark fantasy series. So it's like 3 different genres, and they all take place in a weird time, and they have all very, very unique characters. So yeah, I have to start focusing. So I'm going to be returning to The Divinity of Damien Calla, and I'm going to finish the 2nd and 3rd book entirely. And then I'm going to work on my next series.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. And, you mentioned deadlines, and I did see on your blog, I think it was in January, you did a post about deadlines and struggling with them. And I was going to ask you, had you found anything that works well for you for meeting deadlines? Because it's hard. Everyone struggles with that, especially indie authors who are meeting their own deadlines. Somehow that's even harder, maybe because we know we can push them back.
I don't know. I have author friends here on Facebook. They put out a new book like every 3 weeks. They have a new book coming out, and I'm like, I can't even get one book finished right now. And it's like, I don't know how they do it. And then some of them have full-time jobs. Like I work a full-time job, and I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they find the time to write with everything that's been going around, in the world, with all this crazy stuff. I don't know how people find the time or the inspiration. I posted something on Facebook about that I lost the will to write, I lost inspiration. And then I was reading through one of my books, and I suddenly got it back. Like I just suddenly, I was like, I feel good now. I feel like I want to write again.
Yeah.
But I think we all go through that. At some point we have like a writer's block, and we don't know what to write. We just get to that stalemate. We're like, what do we do now?
I feel for you. We're our own worst critics, especially as independent authors. I think one thing, I'm a little bit older than both of you, but you got to take at some point you'll just take a step back and realize that, don't compare yourself to anyone. Don't compare yourself to the guy or the girl who puts a book out every 3 weeks, because and say, I'm not as good as them, or how can they do that and I can't? They work full-time jobs. How can I can't do this? Once we get caught up in that, I think that just takes us away from where our mind needs to be, because we're all individuals and we all work at a certain pace. We all work at a certain way. And if you actually really think about it, there are millions of people who want to write a book and they can't write it, period. They can never get as far as you've gotten. So kudos to you for doing what you've done.
Yeah,
right? Like you are way ahead of the curve. So just, always when you think that way, I think that way too. I'm thinking, I see these people put out all these books and everything else. I'm going, I need to keep up. And I got to take a step back and say, I'm not them. I'm not Stephen King. I'm not James Patterson. I'm Richard Stevens, and this is the way I write. So, and I think once I come to terms with that, now I don't have the pressure on myself as much as I had before. And then all of a sudden, everything just flows. It's weird that how the human psyche works, but that works for me anyway.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of us, we idolize certain authors, and we're like, we want to be like them. We want to be able to write, as many books as they write. And we have, I know Stephen King. He actually, I don't know if he does it anymore, but he would lock himself away in a room and he just wouldn't come out of there until the book was finished. And some of us can't do that. Some of us can't just lock ourselves away. But
we have a Stephen King, right? We don't need another Stephen King.
No, we don't need another Stephen King.
No, I'm just saying it'd be pretty boring if we had another Stephen King. We got a Stephen King. He's great. We don't need another one. We need a Jennifer Schlag. So,
yeah.
Jennifer, just get your books written, because you're the only Jennifer Schlag we got. So don't worry about Stephen King.
No, I mean, he's my favorite author, but I think that some authors, they try to be like the author they idolize, and they have to understand that, like you said, they're them, he's him, and like J.K. Rowling, she's her. We can't be her. We're going to be,
we don't need another one of them, right?
We're not going to be them. Like it's nice to want to be like, have maybe their fame and have like all their fans, like a big fan base like they have. But I think we should definitely focus on who we are as writers and what we can bring.
Yeah. No, I always tell people, believe in yourself and the world's going to follow you. But until you believe in yourself, they won't. So just believe in yourself and just do it at your own pace, and you'll be just fine. And I think you're doing well. And like I say, there's so many millions of people who want to write a book and they just don't. So you're way ahead of the curve already.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to touch on, you write in several different genres. You write dark fantasy, paranormal romance, sci-fi romance, YA, and then I read children's horror books, and that threw me. I'm thinking, so I want to talk about children's horror books. What exactly constitutes a children's horror book?
Well, it's kind of like, I started a thing called it's called Kidnapping the Reaper, and it's about I think he's 12 years old. I think Jake's 12 years old in there, and his best friend almost dies, and a Grim Reaper comes to take him. And it's meant to, it does have some scary elements to it, but it's very heartwarming. And there's a little bit of, like supernatural stuff with the character Jake. But I decided, I have a lot of friends with kids and I don't have kids. And I was like, how can I appeal to them? Because they don't really particularly care about my, other stuff, my adult writing. So I was like, how can I appeal to them? And I was like, maybe I can write like a children's horror story, something that's not too scary, but it's got scary elements to it. But I put a lot of real life in my books. Like if you pick up any of my books, there's a lot of stuff that you can relate to. I try to make my dialogue very much like how we're talking now. So all my characters, you could have a conversation with any one of my characters. So with the children's horror story, I just wanted to make it, you know, it's sort of personal because I've had a lot of, you know, things happen in my life, and, you know, a lot of, you know, tragic stuff. So I wanted to try to make it so that, you know, kids could maybe understand death a little bit better, and that, yeah, you can be afraid of it, but it's also, you know, it's not the end. There's going to always be something after that. So I think that's what the point of that book was just to make it that it's, you know, it's got some horrific stuff, but there's sort of that sunshine at the end. It's not to be, you know, completely scared of.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's basically what the premise of that story is that Jake, you know, he's like a preteen, and he's going to go through something very tragic. I'm not going to say if his friend dies, but the fact that there's multiple things that happen to his friend, which starts to make him understand, you know, I think the things around him a little bit better. Like he's a special kid. He doesn't really understand why, but he starts to understand why. And he forms like a real connection with this Grim Reaper, who actually teaches him some life lessons that, you know, that I think all kids today need to, you know, maybe need to hear from a book. You know, maybe they can't talk to their parents about it, but they could read it and maybe, you know, relate to what this young kid is going through.
That's so interesting. I love that whole idea. So do you think that did you say this is a series? You're going to continue writing more?
I started it as like these little short stories, and I've been debating if I want to just write it as a full length novel and maybe just break it up into like sections. So I don't know exactly. I had originally had planned like 5 short stories for it, but I think I'm going to combine them all together and just make it one book. So at first I didn't know how people were going to react, because everybody on my Facebook, they all know that I write dark fantasy. And I didn't know how everybody was going to react to children's books. They're like, what is she doing writing a children's book? So I was like, maybe I'll just see how it goes, you know. And a lot of people liked it. Like the people that read it, they said they liked it. And it was hard. It was very, very hard writing a children's book, because I use a lot of curse words in my books. And it was hard not to write curse words when you're writing a children's book. And you have to change your language. You know, your whole style of writing. You can't put, you know, very big words. You know, it's meant to, you know, for kids to read, and, you know, and it was just hard to write. I felt like there was a teacher over my shoulder being like, you can't write this and you can't write that. And I'm just like, but it was fun. It was, like I said, and it's a little personal because of some of the tragedy that I've gone through. So some of my experiences are going to be in the future installments. But it was definitely a change of pace. Like I wrote it very quickly, and it was fun. It was fun writing a short story again, because like I said, I started writing short stories, so it was fun to return to that. I enjoyed it.
So I was reading in your bio that it says you wrote horror and sci-fi as a child. But what actually made you choose the genre of dark fantasy to write in? Like, what inspired you to get into dark fantasy as opposed to epic fantasy?
I want to say that, you know, when you first get into, you know, writing books, you know, we really only had like certain genres to choose from. You know, we really didn't think about the subgenres. We were just thinking there's fantasy, horror, historical, you know, whatever, romance. But now we have epic fantasy, high fantasy. We've got all these different fantasies. And I was like, you know, is my book really just fantasy? Like, to me, fantasy is Lord of the Rings. You know, or, you know, like the movie Legend. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that, but you know, those are like fantasy stories. But the movie Legend is actually considered a dark fantasy. And I like that. Like, I like the dark elements. And I was like, you know what? That's the kind of stuff that I want to write. I don't want to write, they ride off into the sunset and everybody is happy. I want to write it to where maybe it doesn't end so happy. You know, maybe something doesn't, you know, always follow that golden rule of thumb that everything has to, like, the hero has to win and the villain has to lose. So in my books, you know, it's not so much that the hero is going to be heroic and, you know, triumph. Evil might actually be like a healthy balance, both sides might win. Both sides might get what they want. And, you know, that's why when I decided to write, I was like, you know, I don't want to write just, you know, regular fantasy. I was like, I want to write dark fantasy. I was like, epic fantasy to me is like your books, Richard. It's going to be like, you know, 800 pages. I can't do that. I don't know if I could write epic fantasy in 200 pages. I feel like epic fantasy just takes a lot more. You need a big book to do that. I don't think you can do it in 200 pages, but I try to keep my books on the low end when it comes to the page length. It's hard to write. It's hard to write. My first book, Night First, was like 423 pages, and I was like, that was tough because I self-edit. So self-editing 423 pages, speaking out loud, and you're just going over it and over and over it. It just, I was like, 200 pages I can get done in, you know, a short amount of time.
Yeah, no, and you're certainly hit the nail right on the head there, because I edit mine. I have beta readers and everything else, and but when I go through the final polish, I print it off on, and I had a stack of paper that was, I don't know if you see your hands, where are they? They're not there, but it was huge, and it took me probably 2 weeks sitting on the couch and just pouring through this, and then, you know, writing notes and everything else on the paper. And then it took me that long again to sit in front of my computer and transcribe all those notes into the story. And then, yeah, it certainly takes a long time for sure. But so what's your writing process like then? We're talking about editing and that, and you're saying you self-edit. So what is your writing process like from starting, like your writing day? What's your writing day look like? I know you're saying you work full time, so that's obviously going to play into it as well.
Well, right now I work Monday through Friday, so I try to write when I get home. I get home at 1:30, so I try to write a little bit, and then I'll write on the weekends. But I usually try to write as soon as I get home. I try to put in as much time as possible before I have to go to sleep. And now, like I said, now that I've decided to work on only one book at a time, I'm focusing only on that. I'm actually rereading Night First, just to get, you know, familiar with the story again. And I think I'm going to add maybe I think I'm going to change it just a little bit, just to make it a little bit more interesting. But yeah, I start writing as soon as I get home, and I try to write up until like an hour before I have to go to sleep. And sometimes on the weekend I'll spend like one whole day just going over everything, because I just want to make sure I have everything checked off. I don't want to keep making mistakes, and then I have to, because once I print my books, I look through them and I'm like, I should have done this, I should have wrote that and not this. And then I have all these lines going through my book, and I'm like, now I got to go back and revise this book again, which is what I just did with All Aboard the Train, which is my young adult novel. I was like, I should have wrote this. Why didn't I write this? And it's because I was working on too many projects at once and trying to edit too many projects at once. So yeah, that's what I do now. I also now edit each chapter. So once I finish a chapter, I go back through it and I read through it just to see if everything, you know, is put together properly. And I think that what I'm doing now is helping. It's taking a little bit more time, but it's helping me to be a better writer and put out a better book rather than just publishing the book. And that's it.
Do you think that you will end up writing, like finishing a full series for each series you have? I think you have multiple series. Do you think you'll write the whole series for each of them first before publishing, or will it be like different for each series?
I think
like you might publish them along the way.
I'm gonna finish the 2 books for the Divinity of Damon Calla, and I'm gonna release them back to back. Like I might do like a week in between, but I'm gonna release them basically back to back because I want that series. That was my first series. I want it to be finished. And then I'm going to work on my Twin Land series, because that's my next biggest one. It's got like 7 books that have to go in it. So I'm just gonna work on that one, and then I'll finish other things as it comes along, because I feel like that series, that's also another one. The Twin Lands is actually something that started as a screenplay as well. It started the same time as I wrote Govel. So that one I want to finish it. I want to finish that, and yeah, then I'm just gonna bang out all the series, just one by one.
I wish I had the patience for that. Something I'm interested. Some authors are really good about that.
It is hard, but it's well worth it, because I've just, like I said, I haven't been able to keep the deadlines, and it bothers me, because I have all these new book ideas that I want to work on, and I know if I start those, I'll never finish my other ones. They'll just sit there, and it'll be 20 years by the time, and I don't want to do that. So I have to stick to this commitment of going series by series.
Do you know, I read once that there was an author who spent, I don't know how many years it was, but it was years, writing one 20-book sci-fi series, and then he wanted to release it like month after month,
Wow.
one each month. And I was just like, how can you hold it in? I couldn't, especially having that many. Once I was up to book 5, forget it. I mean, probably book 2 for me, but it was just an amazing thing. But it does make sense if you can release a series, pretty close together. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, there's an author, I don't remember his name now, but he actually writes this book called Pharisees or something about that. But it's like a sci-fi book. But he releases a new book. I think he's up to like 15 books in this series, and I think he's releasing one every month. And I mean they're good. They're good books, but yeah, I don't know how he does it. I just don't know how he finds the time to just write them, and like I said, they're good. They're really good stories. I have to find out what his name is again. I think his name is John Adams. I think it's John Adams. But yeah, he just bangs these books out like. And I was like, wow. I was like, I can't do that. I wish I could. And then I have another author friend of mine. She writes paranormal romance, and she's just writing like a book every 2 weeks. And I was like, I don't know how you're doing that. I can't do that.
It's beyond imagining for me.
I can't do that either.
Yeah, imagine you releasing 500-page book every 2 weeks.
Now, I don't know how they do it either, because you got the editing, you got everything else that's got to go in that takes place in there too. So I know what I've tried to do with Legends of the Lurker. I tried to rapid release them to take advantage of the Amazon algorithms. If you release a book a month, then your second book ups the algorithms for book 1, and then a month later you release book 3 and it ups book 2, which ups book 1, and it's supposed to really boost your sales. So I tried to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And I just can't do it. Like you say, I have book 1 done, and it sits on the shelf as I'm writing book 2, and at some point I'm just thinking I want to publish it. I'm not patient enough, so I just publish it, and then I tried to do it again. So once I did Legends of the Lurker, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to do it again with the Bainbridge companion novels. That didn't work last year, so I figured this year I'm going to do it with the Highcliffe Guardians. And of course, book 1 came out to 626 pages, and it just took so long that I figured it's been 8 months since my last book was released. It's time to put one out. So
yeah,
much.
Imagine if you were actually hiring an editor too, because an editor can.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
They can take weeks, to edit a book.
You got beta readers, and you got everything else. You got your own editing, and you got everything else that takes place in there. So these people that are releasing them that quickly, they either are not editing, period, and I don't think that's the case. I think that maybe they're writing ahead of time and stockpiling them, and then now they've got them. As I release book 1, I'm writing book 15, and it's kind of. I just don't have the tenacity and the patience to sit on a book for that long. I got to get it out.
Well, that's why I want to start doing live reads, because I noticed that when you do your live reads, Richard, it's like, I think it helps you to edit. I think because
that's part of my editing process for sure.
Yeah, you find those mistakes by actually speaking your book out loud,
especially between quotes. It really makes a big difference.
Yeah, and then you can correct it right there. Yep. So I think, and Rusty does it too. I think he. Yeah.
He's starting to do the edits now too. Before he was just the writer's circus he runs, and he was just reading his book and other authors' books, which is great. And he's the one who actually got me into doing that. But then I figured, I'm going to take it one step further. And there's so many different ways to edit. You can edit on screen. You can edit by printing it. People say edit it out loud, and I don't know myself. It's silly, but I feel stupid just talking to my computer in a room with no one in it. So then I figured, well, I'll do these live reads and live edit. And even though it's basically boils down to I'm sitting in a room by myself talking to my computer, it just seems different because I'm on air. So it certainly does make a difference.
But yeah, and then you can also get, feedback from any of us that are listening to you. We might say, hey, you know what, that doesn't really sound, maybe you should write it like this. And, but then we can, give you feedback right away rather than
I do encourage that. And I think I've asked Christy a couple of times live on air that, what do you think that sounds like? So yeah, it's a great way to edit. It's a nice, as an indie,
I know, I got to get into
be creative.
I got to get over my camera shy thing. But
well, you know what? If it wasn't for Russell Trimble, I would never have done this at all. Period. I wouldn't even be doing Legends for Lurking. I can't say it. Lurking for Legends. Because I am a bad speaker. I'm not a good speaker, and I know that. But I've come to terms with the fact that I'll never be a good speaker. And if I want to advance my career, I got to just put myself out there and hum and haw and fumble over things and just do it and put myself out there. So that's what I'm doing now, and it certainly does make a big difference to your writing. So whenever you're ready to do your live reads, let me know, and we'll certainly tune in and listen to them.
I'm going to do it for probably the next book in the Damian Callis series, which is actually called Illuminated Darkness. So I'm going to probably do the live reads for that because, I'm going to encourage people to read the first book because they won't know what I'm talking about. There's so much that happens in the second book. But yeah, I think
no one ever knows what I'm talking about when I'm speaking on live reads. But it's, I got a few people that come and go, and I got a few faithful ones that like to do it every Friday with me. I haven't done it lately because I've just been in total editing phase. So I'll be doing one, probably, hopefully starting again next week. I'll start. So what I do, this is what works for me, is I write all week, and then on Friday I live read what I wrote all week. So
yeah, I've been in revising mode, through all my books right now. So now that that's over, I can really focus on writing again rather than just reading through things over and over. But yeah, it's gonna be good to get back into writing full time like I was before I had to start working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and that's kudos to everyone who's working full time, because I never put out a book when I was working full time. I just couldn't do it. So right away you're ahead of me right there. So never knock yourself for your deadlines. I never meet my deadlines either. You impose a deadline, you hope you hit it, but
we'd all be in a lot of trouble if we were all traditionally published and we're like, we had a deadline, we had to get it done in 6 months.
Well, what I think actually that would help. When I went back, I dropped out of high school. When I went back to school, I did online courses, and I didn't have a teacher over my shoulder cracking a whip, and I never finished the online course. I just couldn't. I didn't have the incentive to do it. So I actually went to school with a bunch of young kids, and I was like 35, sitting in the classroom with them. But I had a teacher saying, "You have to have this done by Wednesday." And what a difference that made. So I think if you're traditionally published, you have that teacher pointing at you, and I think that would make a difference to your deadlines. But
I feel it's totally different. Like when it's full time, at least for me, everything else kind of gets in the, I have my own editing business full time. So that's really what has to take precedence. I do other things on the side to earn money. So like, it's not like I have a full time job where it's definite money. There's like always that kind of, either way you go, there's, something that's going to get in the way. And it's really funny because I actually ended up publishing more full-length novels while I was in the most stressful job I've ever worked in than now, when I'm much happier and like I'm getting more on top of it, publishing more short stories and stuff in between. But it is weird how that works, and it's hard to kind of figure out why, like what is going on inside your brain that makes it easier one way or another. I wish that I was a full-time writer. That's something I'm kind of working toward.
Yeah, me too.
I do feel like that's a whole other thing, because even if you don't put your own deadlines on yourself, which I don't really put deadlines on myself, I just write, and then when it's ready, it's ready. I learned a long time ago not to I never announce anything because
that's exactly
you just never know.
For sure. I've learned that too. Don't impose deadlines on yourself. Soft deadlines are fine.
Yeah.
You try to hit those, but don't put the pressure on yourself, because it'll backfire. It's going to make you not want to write, because you're going to realize as you get close to deadline that there's no way I'm going to make it, and you're going to get deflated, and then you'll never make it for sure. So,
well, let's talk about the box set that I was in. When we made it to the USA bestseller list, we had a deadline. We had to have our books completed.
Yes.
We had 2 months to do it. And I was just like, oh God, how am I going to do that? And also write the other things. And yeah, so having that deadline, it was weird because I was like, oh, I really need to get that deadline. I can't just say, I can forget about it. So yeah, absolutely. Soft deadlines are better than hard deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a sort of good stress that comes in with that kind of stuff. Because I find exactly what you said is what happens to me when I want to submit to an anthology or something. There's a deadline and I'm like, I'm never going to make it. And then I do. And it's a miracle.
Yeah.
But it's every time, you know, so I relate to that a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm just conscious of the time, so we're.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We have a soft timeline as well, but where we are. So, just in closing, before we let you go, Jennifer, if somebody is interested in buying your books, any of your books, to whatever genres you're writing in, where would they find them? Are you exclusive to Amazon? Are you wide? Where would people go to look for your
on
books?
Amazon right now. I'm gonna probably be going wide with Ingram Spark at some point, but right now everything is on Amazon. So if someone types in my name, they just type in Jennifer Ann Schlag, and you'll find my Amazon page and it has all my books.
Okay, and what about a website? What's your website? I know we have it in
that's www.jenniferannschlag.com.
Oh, Christy just put it in there for you. Awesome. Okay, so just quickly, Jennifer, what's the next thing that we can look forward to from Jennifer Ann Schlag?
Finishing my Divinity of Damien Callas, starting with Illuminated Darkness, and then the last book is called Dark Reign.
Cool. And that is what genre?
That's dark fantasy.
Cool.
With a vampire twist in it.
Okay. So, people can sink their teeth into that. Sorry. So, Christy, if you got anything new that's coming up, do you have any news that you'd like to share with us before we go?
Well, I don't have a whole lot of new news. I have been working more on the third full-length book, the novel in the Victoriana collection. I've made some big breakthroughs recently, sharing more of those on my Patreon. So, I think I said like a couple of weeks ago, I'm actually only $4 away from making my goal. So, if anybody has $1 that they just want to kick in and read some exclusive fiction, I do post exclusive fiction that I'm not going to put anywhere else for you guys, then, head on over to patreon.com/Christy Stratus. I post every Friday, which is more often than Patreon suggests posting, but I love doing it. I really enjoy it. Post all different kinds of things. So please join me over there. It's less than the cost of your coffee, even if you get it from McDonald's. So I hope to see you there. That is actually my most recent news. How about you, Richard?
Cool. No, I have no recent news other than I'm going to hopefully start my live reads again next week. Starting back into book 2, Dragon Sect.
Yes.
But I've been away from it for so long that I figured it's like almost 300 pages long already.
That's the one that has the name of the dragon that I have. I named the dragon that one. Yes.
Yep. So Dragon Sect. So I figured, I'm just going to reread it. And as I'm doing it, I'm editing, and it's taking me forever to get through 280 pages. So hopefully I'll get through that at the end of this week, or maybe the beginning of next week, and then I'll start writing the story again. We'll get the live reads going again on Friday. But that's all that's going on in my thing. And I'm editing every day. I edit a few chapters from the next book that my narrator is narrating for me. So that's how I start my morning coffee with, is narrating and editing the audiobook. So yeah, I'm very busy. Anyway, next week's guest is another Jennifer Ann. That's quite the coincidence. And she writes Gothic horror, which is kind of along your line. So her name is Jennifer Ann Gordon. And she writes Gothic horror and literary speculative fiction. So I don't know how those two play out together. Her works include Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent 2020, which won the Kindle Award for Best Horror Suspense, and it won Best Horror for Authors of the Air. I should have edited this better when I was reading it. But anyway, we'll talk to Jennifer Ann Gordon next week. And yeah, I guess that's it. I got this big spiel all written out, but it just kind of rambles on, so I'll just stop right there. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Jennifer, for being with us, and Christy, and everybody in the comments. Thank you for taking part in Lurking for Legends again this Tuesday, and we hope to see everyone again next week. So until then, take care.
All right, bye.